Hello, welcome to another reading of my novel Boston Accent. I am Mark Mattioli, and we're a little under the weather today. Last night was the Super Bowl, which we're not going to talk about any more than that. Okay, Boston Accent is available on Amazon.com, and this is mature subject matter. And let's pick up where we left off. Rachel and I made no attempt to contact each other following the stabbing, but it was just a matter of time before we ran into each other. It was a small town, and we shared some of the same friends. One event that occurred while we were apart was the torching of the Ramrod Dance Hall. The owners were having major financial issues, and one night the place went up in flames. The next day, Jake, Rick, and I parked in the lot, made cocktails from our bar in the trunk, and posed for pictures, having a last drink at the club. 10 years later, I was having a drink near the old club and making small talk with this guy I had met before when he tells me that he was one of two people that torched the place. There was a lot of that going on at the time. Making every attempt to avoid Rachel, I started spending more time attending parties outside of town, where I was pretty sure I would run into her. One night, coming home from a party that my childhood girlfriend Dee had invited me to, I ran into some problems as I pulled into my parents' driveway. This was the end result of action I had taken against someone, and the fact that Rachel had gone to this person and ratted on me. What happened was my old thieving buddy Gary had been out roaming the neighborhood just like we had done when we were kids. He was now 19, still hadn't grown up, and still had no respect for anyone in the neighborhood, including me. He was making the rounds with Rick when he went into my car and stole my stereo, even though Rick told him not to. The very next day, Rick was at my house telling me what happened. Gary had always been a little bitter about the way I had stopped hanging around with him, but I didn't expect him to rip me off. I made a couple of phone calls, and I had several friends take a ride with me to Gary's to get my stereo back. When I knocked on Gary's door, Gary's mom answered and said he wasn't home. I explained to her that he ripped me off, and she invites me to search his room. I find nothing. As we're leaving the house, the cops pull up and have us all get out of the car. Gary's mom had called the cops saying we had forced our way into her home. The cops knew us, all the Pineville cops knew us. And Gary was the John Dillinger in our town, and the cops had a strong dislike for him. I was told to stay off Gary's property, and Rick was taken in for an outstanding warrant. When I told my mom what had happened, she went right to Gary's to talk to his mom. An hour later, she walked through the door with my stereo. Gary's mom had known where it was hidden the whole time. Gary's ripping me off made a loud statement, one that we were no longer friends, and two, that he had no respect for me, and the latter pissed me off. I felt compelled to do something about it. I had to make a statement of my own. A week after I got my stereo back, I was in the back seat with Rachel on a car being driven by JT, with Valerie riding shotgun when we passed Gary's house. JT slowed down to check out a boat that was in his driveway with a for sale sign on it. The boat was a 16-foot fiberglass cruiser with cabin sitting on a steel trailer. As soon as I saw it, I told JT to let me out. Once the car was out of sight, I approached the boat and climbed up into it. I went down into the cabin, where I found all the boat cushions being stored on a bed. I gathered up the cushions and brought them into the bathroom, where I slit them open with the knife I carried and stacked them on top of the toilet. I then lit the bottom cushion with my lighter, shut the bathroom door, and climbed out of the boat. I ran down the street to one of the trails that would take me home without having to use the road. As I entered the trail and headed into the woods, I began to wonder if the fire had gone out, so I stopped, lit a smoke, and waited, watching through the trees for flames. When after a minute I couldn't see anything, I walked back into the street and looked towards the boat to see it fully involved with flames shooting high in the air. I ran back down the trail and didn't stop until I was walking in my house out of breath. My parents had a police scanner in the living room, and as I was getting myself a drink in the kitchen, I heard a Pineville cop telling dispatch that the fire department could take their time. There was nothing left to save. As I headed down to my room, I glanced at my mom sitting next to the scanner, and she was giving me this look that said she knew, but she never said a word. So now we jump back to post Rachel, and she is at a party with Valerie, when who walks through the door but Gary. Rachel is buzzed and bitter, and even though she doesn't know for sure, no one does, there was no witnesses, she knows I was dropped off in front of Gary's the night his boat burned, and she decides to share this information with him. Now it's the next night, and Jake is driving my car home from Dee's party because I'm trashed. As soon as Jake parks in my woods, I spot a car pulling in behind us, and two guys jump out. It's Gary and a friend of ours we call Swindle that has just served 2 years in prison and is huge from lifting weights. I'm leaning on my car waiting for Jake to help me in the house when Gary walks up and says, "Did you burn my boat?" I say, "No," and Gary screams at me, "You're a fucking liar," and takes a swing at me. Even as drunk as I was, I still had the sense to duck, and I grabbed hold of him. Now, on my worst day, Gary could never kick my ass. He was reasonably big and scary looking, and most people backed down from him. I knew he couldn't fight worth shit, so I wasn't real worried, and Swindle was hanging on to Jake, telling him to stay out of it. Gary and I wrestle to the ground, and I feel his fingers near my eyes, and I jerk my head just as he digs his dirty fingernails into my face while trying to gouge out my eyes. I then hear my mother yell, "I just called the cops," and Gary and Swindle jump in the car and leave. My mother hadn't really called the cops, she just wanted them to leave. The next day, we have an appointment to have a family portrait done at the church our family attends, and my face is all cut up. My mother's furious, and I volunteer to stay out of the picture, but my mother insists I be in it. "That's who you are," she says. That portrait hung in my mother's house for years, and I don't recall anyone ever making a comment about my appearance. I guess they knew who I was as well. Un momento. The blizzard of 78 was much more than a major snowstorm for me and my friends. It was an out-of-control party that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. It's funny. This is so bizarre. As I'm reading this, today is the anniversary of the blizzard of 78. This was not planned. This is just shit luck. Okay. I just had to, okay. There was a ban on non-essential vehicles on the road, so the first thing I did was go for a ride, of course. My parents still had electricity, as did a lot of people, but Brett's didn't. His parents left the house and went and stayed with relatives that did. Brett's house became party central, with kids showing up with firewood, booze, dope, and food. The lack of electricity was not fazing us a bit. We thought it was great. While at my parents' house, I received a call from Rick. He tells me he stole a snowmobile and used it to transport cases of liquor stolen from a private lodge he broke into. He asked me to come get him in the booze and bring him over to Brett's. I remember thinking this was pushing my luck because I had to travel over main roads to get to him. At the same time, I knew I couldn't leave Rick hanging. I went and picked him up with no problems. I didn't see one cop on the road, just plows. When I walked through the door at Brett's, I came face to face with Rachel. My first thought was, I won't be here long. But then she asked to speak to me in private, and we went into one of the bedrooms and shut the door. We both apologized for the hateful things we had done to each other and agreed to make every effort to be respectful of each other going forward. Neither one of us had any intentions of becoming romantically involved with the other from here on, but Rachel started a pattern that night that would continue for the next 2 years when she crawled into bed with me. The next day, we both acted like nothing happened until nightfall, and then Rachel came back again. The third night, we all cleared out when the power came back on, and Brett's parents called to say they were on the way home. Poor Brett and Katie. The house was destroyed with empty booze bottles and the kitchen floor all sticky from all the spilt drinks. Rachel and I would continue to see each other only for sex, even while we dated other people. It was a secret that only a few people knew about. The following summer, I got a call one night from Kate asking me to grab my sleeping bag and meet her in the woods behind my house on one of the trails. When I got there, Rachel was with her, and they were both pretty buzzed and sitting by a fire. They were drinking Captain Morgan and Coke, so I helped myself to a couple of very stiff drinks to catch up to them. As the fire died down, I felt Rachel's hand on my leg, and I began to kiss her. She stood up, removed all her clothes, and lay back down next to me. I began to caress her, with the light from the fire illuminated her body. While I had my back to Kate, I heard her stand up and say, "I have to pee," and then walked into the woods. When she came back, she stood across from the fire watching me run my hands over Rachel's body, and she slowly removed all her clothes. I looked from Kate to Rachel and then back again and said, "You guys had a game plan." "You're damn straight," they both said at the same time and cracked up laughing. Kate came over and kneeled behind me and pulled me towards her, kissing me, and said, "Are you getting naked or what?" You don't have to ask me twice, and I quickly joined them, and the three of us made love until we passed out. The next morning, I got up while Rachel and Kate were still asleep, grabbing my sleeping bag and headed home. This would be my standard method of operation going forward. When I woke up with a woman, or two, and it wasn't in my house, I would quietly get dressed and leave before they woke. I guess I wanted to avoid any uncomfortable emotions the morning after, in addition to sending a message that read, "I like you, but it was only sex." After that day, I had sex with Rachel several times, and it was almost always in the middle of the night in my room at my parents' house. She would make her date drive past my house to see if I was home. After he dropped her off at her house, she would come to my house and knock on my window. I'd pull her in, we'd have great sex, and then she would leave back out the window. It was a great arrangement until she showed up at my window and somebody was already in my bed. Then the agreement we had to be nice to each other went out the window, and she went on a mission for the next year and a half to destroy every relationship I was in to ensure that my bed would be empty when she showed up. Okay, boy, we took a lot of wind to finish that. We're going to end that right there. That's the end of that segment, and we're out of time. We'll pick up tomorrow where we left off. And if you view this today, I am going to be on Blog Talk Radio this evening at 10 p.m. on the Possum Hour. If you're not familiar with that, you log into blogtalkradio.com, register, and then key in Possum Hour. And I'll be a guest on the show tonight, and I'll be talking about my book. And you can call in and talk to me live on the radio. All right? That's it. We're out of time. We'll do this again tomorrow, God willing. I'm Mark Mattioli. The book is Boston Accent. Ciao.